Man invites his black ex-girlfriend to his wedding to humiliate her, but she turns the tables in an unexpected way. My dear storytelling family members, welcome to another heartwarming tale on Mr. Peter's Stories. With love and gratitude, I invite you to subscribe and stay connected to our magical journey. The grand ballroom of the Belmont Hotel sparkled with crystal chandeliers and elegant floral arrangements on that fateful Saturday evening. Matilda Ann stood before the massive oak doors, her heart steady despite the weight of the moment. She wore a stunning emerald silk dress that complemented her dark skin perfectly, its subtle shimmer catching the light with each breath. Her success as one of the city's premier event planners had taught her how to command attention without seeking it. As she pushed open the doors, hundreds of faces turned to stare. Among them was Lennox Jasper, standing at the altar beside his bride-to-be, Liliana Foster. The music faltered for a moment as recognition flickered across Lennox's face. First surprise, then something darker. Liliana, resplendent in her white gown, remained oblivious to the tension suddenly filling the room. The wedding ceremony had just begun, with guests still finding their seats among the white-draped chairs. Rose petals scattered across the aisle seemed to wilt under the intensity of Lennox's glare. Matilda moved with graceful confidence to take her seat, aware of the whispers that followed her path. Some guests recognized her as the owner of Elite Events, the company orchestrating this very wedding, though few knew of her history with the groom. Through the carefully curated chaos of the pre-ceremony moments, Matilda caught snippets of conversation about the couple. Lennox had met Liliana at a corporate function just 8 months ago, a whirlwind romance that led to this hasty wedding. What the gossiping guests didn't know was that Liliana had once worked as an event coordinator for Matilda's company, though they'd never met in person during her brief tenure. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Matilda. 3 years ago, she had been the one dreaming of a future with Lennox. She remembered those days with clarity. The long nights at the hospital, the countless sacrifices, the love she had given so freely. Now she sat here not as a bitter ex-girlfriend, but as a successful businesswoman who had transformed her pain into purpose. Lennox's mother, seated in the front row, kept casting nervous glances between her son and Matilda. She had been there the day Lennox cruelly ended things, had witnessed his hateful words, yet had remained silent. Today, her silence felt heavier, laden with the knowledge of what her son was capable of. The wedding planner, one of Matilda's most trusted employees, moved efficiently through the space, directing the final preparations. She gave Matilda a subtle nod, confirming that everything was in place. Not for sabotage or revenge, but for protection. Matilda had learned long ago that the best defense was being prepared for anything. As the wedding officiant stepped forward to begin the ceremony, Matilda could see Lennox fidgeting with his cufflinks, a nervous habit she remembered well. His eyes kept darting to where she sat, his jaw clenched tight. She knew that look. He was planning something. The invitation to this wedding hadn't been an olive branch, but a carefully planned attempt at public humiliation. Little did he know that this wedding would indeed become memorable, though not for the reasons he intended. Matilda sat perfectly still, her posture relaxed but alert, watching as the pieces of fate began to align. The real story was about to unfold, and she was ready for whatever came next. A life-saving sacrifice thunder crashed outside Grady Memorial Hospital as Matilda paced the sterile hallways, her heart pounding in sync with the storm. It was 2:37 a.m. on a rain-soaked Atlanta night when her world tilted on its axis. The call had come from a paramedic, his voice grave as he explained that Lennox's car had hydroplaned on I-85, spinning 3 times before slamming into a concrete barrier. She had never driven so fast in her life, the wipers barely keeping up with the deluge. The emergency room buzzed with controlled chaos when she arrived. Doctors in blood-stained scrubs rushed past, their faces masks of concentration. Lennox lay unconscious, his normally immaculate appearance marred by cuts and bruises. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Chen, pulled Matilda aside, her dark eyes serious beneath her surgical cap. "Ms. Anne, Mr. Jasper needs emergency surgery and multiple transfusions," Dr. Chen explained. "His blood type is B negative, one of the rarest. We're running critically low on supplies, and with this storm, transfers from other hospitals are delayed." Without hesitation, Matilda rolled up her sleeve. "Test me. I'm B negative too." The words came automatically. She had known Lennox's blood type since their third date, when he'd mentioned his family's history of blood disorders. Dr. Chen's eyebrows rose slightly, but she nodded and called for a nurse. The next 6 hours became a blur of needles, forms, and waiting room chairs that seemed designed to prevent comfort. Matilda watched her blood flow through clear tubes, each drop carrying her love and hope for Lennox's recovery. She ignored the growing dizziness, waving away the nurse's concerns. "Take what he needs," she insisted. During the surgery, Matilda called Lennox's parents. His mother answered on the fourth ring, her voice thick with sleep. As Matilda explained the situation, Mrs. Jasper's initial confusion gave way to barely concealed disdain. "We'll be there as soon as we can," she said stiffly, "though I'm sure the hospital staff has everything under control without your intervention." The surgery stretched into the morning. Matilda's boss called, wondering why she hadn't shown up to coordinate the Thompson wedding. She explained the situation, her voice breaking as she asked for emergency leave. There was a long pause before he agreed, reminding her that as a probationary employee, her position might not be secure upon return. Finally, Dr. Chen emerged, looking exhausted but satisfied. "The surgery was successful," she announced. "The blood transfusion likely saved his life, without immediate access to his blood type." She left the sentence unfinished, but her meaning was clear. Recovery proved to be a marathon, not a sprint. Lennox's injuries required extensive physical therapy, and his insurance only covered a fraction of the costs. Matilda took a second job bartending at the Blue Room, working from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. after spending her days caring for Lennox. She sold her car, moved to a smaller apartment, and used her savings to help cover his medical bills. Each physical therapy session became a battle against pain and despair. Lennox would curse and struggle, his face contorted in agony as he attempted simple movements. Matilda stood by him, absorbing his frustration, offering endless encouragement. "Remember our dreams," she would say, massaging his aching muscles. "Think about the house we'll build, the family we'll have." On good days, they planned their future between exercises. Lennox talked about the promotion he'd get once he returned to work, how he'd take care of her the way she'd taken care of him. They spent hours scrolling through real estate listings, imagining their life in each home. Matilda started a vision board, filling it with images of their dream house, travel destinations, and wedding ideas. The physical therapist, Marcus, often commented on their dedication. "In 15 years of practice," he said one day, watching Matilda help Lennox with his exercises, "I've never seen such devotion." His words made Matilda smile, but she didn't see it as devotion. This was simply what love meant to her. During those long months, Matilda learned every nuance of Lennox's pain. She memorized which positions hurt less, which movements caused the most discomfort. She became an expert at reading his expressions, anticipating his needs before he voiced them. Night after night, she held him through phantom pains and nightmares about the accident. His family visited occasionally, always with an air of polite distance. His mother would bring expensive health foods and herbal supplements, pointedly ignoring the home-cooked meals Matilda prepared. His father would discuss business opportunities waiting at the firm, speaking as if Matilda weren't in the room, yet she persisted, believing that time and dedication would eventually break down these barriers. 2 years passed this way, measured in small victories and setbacks. Matilda tracked every milestone: the first time Lennox walked without assistance, his return to part-time work, the day he finally drove again. Each achievement felt like a shared triumph, another step toward their future together. What Matilda couldn't know, as she devoted herself to Lennox's recovery, was that her sacrifices were being tallied differently in his mind. Every bill she paid, every night she spent by his hospital bed, every sacrifice she made, these weren't building the foundation of their future, but rather debt he would come to resent. The blood that flowed through his veins, her blood, would become a burden too heavy for his pride to bear. The cruel betrayal. The morning of September 15th dawned bright and clear, offering no warning of the devastation to come. Matilda had spent extra time getting ready, wearing her new navy blue blazer and the pearl earrings Lennox had given her for their last anniversary. In her leather portfolio, she carried the contract for her first major independent event, the Johnson-Pierce wedding, a $500,000 affair that could launch her career to new heights. Anderson and Mills investment firm occupied 3 floors of Atlanta's prestigious Peachtree Plaza. Matilda knew the security guards by name now, after 2 years of visiting Lennox. Today, Marcus at the front desk gave her a strange look as he handed over her visitor's badge. "Mr. Jasper's on the 42nd floor," he said, hesitating. "In the executive conference room." The elevator ride felt longer than usual. Matilda balanced 2 bags from Taj Palace, Lennox's favorite Indian restaurant. The curry's aromatic spices filled the air, reminding her of their first date when she'd introduced him to Indian cuisine. He'd been skeptical at first, but ended up loving it so much they went back 3 times that month. When the elevator doors opened, she immediately sensed something was different. The usual friendly faces of Lennox's colleagues were averted. His secretary, Jennifer, who usually greeted Matilda warmly, suddenly became engrossed in her computer screen. Through the glass walls of the conference room, she could see Lennox sitting with several senior partners, his posture rigid. He looked up as she approached, and the expression on his face made her blood run cold. It was the same look he'd given the physical therapist who'd suggested he might never regain full mobility, a mixture of contempt and determination. "Matilda," he said, stepping into the hallway, "we need to talk." The conference room felt like a courtroom, with Lennox's colleagues as silent witnesses. She set the food down on the heavy mahogany table, the rustle of paper bags deafening in the silence. "Is everything okay?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "This isn't working anymore," Lennox began, his voice carefully modulated. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, Atlanta's skyline spreading behind him like a kingdom he'd conquered. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since my promotion, about image, about the future, about what I need in a partner." Each word that followed was precisely chosen, delivered with surgical cruelty. "Someone like you doesn't fit into my world, Matilda. My clients, my colleagues, they expect a certain image. You were good enough when I needed someone to take care of me. But let's be realistic. I can't have you holding me back." The curry grew cold as Lennox systematically dismantled their relationship. He spoke about his family's expectations, about his career trajectory, about the social circles he now moved in. The word image came up repeatedly, each time cutting deeper than the last. "The blood you gave me," he said, his voice hardening. "The help during recovery, I appreciate it. I'll pay you back every cent you spent. But don't pretend it was more than what it was. Convenience. You were there, you were useful, and now that chapter's over." Through the glass walls, Matilda could see people pretending not to watch. Jennifer had given up the pretense of working and was openly staring, her hand covering her mouth. One of the senior partners, an older man with silver hair, looked away when Matilda caught his eye, shame evident on his face. "I have the Johnson-Pierce wedding contract," Matilda said quietly, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest. "They're paying $500,000. I thought we could celebrate." Lennox laughed, the sound sharp and unfamiliar. "That's exactly what I'm talking about. You think a wedding planner is an appropriate partner for someone in my position? I'm handling multi-million-dollar accounts, Matilda. I'm being groomed for partnership. I need someone who enhances my image, not someone who serves cake at parties." The portfolio in her hands suddenly felt heavy, the contract inside worthless. All those nights working 2 jobs, all the savings spent on his medical bills, all the dreams they'd shared, they crumbled like ancient paper in the acid of his words. "The blood in your veins," she said softly, "is my blood." "And I wish it wasn't," he snapped. "Do you know how it feels, knowing I'm walking around with your blood inside me? Every success I have, there's this voice reminding me I owe it to you. Well, I don't want to owe you anything anymore. Name your price. Whatever you spent on medical bills, whatever you think you're owed, I'll write a check right now." The cruelty of his offer hung in the air like poison gas. Outside the conference room, the office had gone completely still. Even the phones had stopped ringing, as if the universe itself was holding its breath in witness to this betrayal. Matilda stood, smoothing her blazer with trembling hands. 2 years of love, of sacrifice, of dreams, reduced to a transaction. She looked at Lennox, really looked at him, and for the first time saw him clearly. A hollow man, well-dressed and ambitious, but empty inside. "Keep your money," she said, her voice carrying in the silence. "But remember this moment, Lennox. Remember that when you had nothing, when you were broken and alone, someone who you think is beneath you gave you everything without asking for anything in return. And remember that you repaid that love with shame." She walked out of the conference room, past the staring faces, past Jennifer, who had tears in her eyes, past Marcus at security, who called after her with concern. She made it to her car before the first sob broke free, but she didn't let herself cry for long. Instead, she pulled out her phone and called the Johnson-Pierce wedding contact. "Mrs. Pierce, this is Matilda Ann. I wanted to confirm that I'm accepting the contract. Yes, I have some wonderful ideas to discuss." Her voice was steady, professional, not betraying the fact that her world had just imploded. She would not let Lennox Jasper steal her dreams along with her heart. That evening, alone in her apartment, Matilda took down the vision board they'd made together. She looked at each picture, the house they'd planned to buy, the destinations they'd dreamed of visiting, the wedding themes they'd chosen, and methodically tore them to pieces. But one picture she kept, a simple image of a woman standing alone on a mountain peak. She placed it in the center of a new board, the first piece of her rebuilt life. Rising from the ashes. The first week after the breakup, Matilda threw herself into the Johnson-Pierce wedding with a ferocity that surprised even herself. Her small apartment became a war room of inspiration boards, vendor contracts, and meticulous timelines. She worked 18-hour days, transforming her pain into purpose, her humiliation into hunger for success. The wedding itself became more than just an event. It became her manifesto. Every detail was a statement of her worth, every successful negotiation a quiet rebellion against Lennox's dismissal. Mrs. Pierce, initially skeptical of such a young planner handling her daughter's $500,000 wedding, soon became Matilda's most vocal advocate. "The attention to detail is extraordinary," Mrs. Pierce told her friends at the Atlanta Country Club, the same elite circle where Lennox's family held court. "She thinks of things I wouldn't have imagined, and she has this way of making everything feel both grand and intimately personal." The Johnson-Pierce wedding was held at the Saint, Regis Atlanta, transforming the ballroom into an enchanted garden. When guests walked in, they gasped at the ceiling-height cherry blossom trees, the floating candles that seemed to dance in mid-air, the way the lighting made everyone look like they'd stepped into a fairy tale. Nobody knew that Matilda had slept on the ballroom floor the night before, personally adjusting every light until it was perfect. The event made the society pages. A new star rises in Atlanta's event planning scene, the headline read. The article didn't name her. She'd insisted on staying behind the scenes, but it spoke of a mysterious new talent who was revolutionizing the industry. Whoever this unknown genius is, the article concluded, they're redefining what's possible in event planning. Matilda took the article, along with the check from the Johnson-Pierce wedding, to the bank. She'd been planning this moment since the day Lennox shattered her heart. The bank manager raised his eyebrows when she laid out her business plan. Elite events, she said, pointing to the projected financials. I want to create something different, not just weddings and parties, but experiences that tell stories. Every event should be a transformation. The loan was approved within a week. Matilda used part of it to rent a small office in Buckhead, deliberately choosing a building where she knew many of Lennox's clients had offices. She hired her first employee, Jennifer, Lennox's former secretary, who had quit Anderson and Mills the week after witnessing his cruelty. I couldn't work for someone like that anymore, Jennifer explained during her interview. The way he treated you, it opened my eyes. I want to work for someone who builds things, not breaks them. Elite events grew faster than anyone expected. Matilda's approach to event planning, treating each occasion as a piece of immersive theatre, caught the attention of Atlanta's elite. She never appeared at the events herself, letting her work speak for itself. Her team expanded. Florists, designers, lighting specialists, all trained to see events as stories waiting to be told. Within a year, Elite Events had offices in 3 cities. Matilda's reputation spread through whispered recommendations at country clubs and corporate boardrooms. If you want something unforgettable, people would say, you need to call Elite Events, but don't expect to meet the owner. She's as mysterious as her creations. The mystery became part of the allure. Atlanta's social circles buzzed with theories about the enigmatic force behind the city's most talked-about events. Some claimed she was a European aristocrat. Others insisted she was a former Hollywood producer. The truth, that she was the same woman they'd seen countless times at Lennox's side, remained hidden behind carefully constructed layers of corporate structure. Matilda purchased the building where she'd first rented office space, transforming it into Elite Events headquarters. From her top-floor office, she could see the Anderson and Mills building where Lennox had broken her heart, but she no longer felt pain when she looked at it, only a quiet satisfaction at how far she'd come. She donated generously to local hospitals, establishing a fund for patients who needed blood transfusions but couldn't afford them. Each donation came with a note, because sometimes saving a life means saving yourself. She never signed these notes, but the irony would not be lost on Lennox if he ever discovered their source. 2 years after starting Elite Events, Matilda attended a business conference in New York. There, she met James Edwards, a self-made tech entrepreneur who looked at her with admiration instead of judgment. On their first date, when she told him about her past with Lennox, he didn't offer empty sympathy. He couldn't see your worth, James said simply. His loss, my incredible gain. He proposed 6 months later, understanding and supporting her desire to keep her identity as Elite Events owner private. Their wedding was small, intimate, and pointedly not planned by her company. The morning Lennox's wedding invitation arrived at Elite Events' office, Matilda was reviewing expansion plans for their West Coast division. The company now employed over 200 people, had offices in 7 cities, and was valued at several $1 million. The invitation lay on her desk like a loaded gun. "The client is requesting the owner's presence," Jennifer reported, a knowing look in her eyes. "Apparently, the groom specifically asked for you to be there. They don't know." Matilda picked up the invitation, running her fingers over the embossed letters. 3 years had passed since that day in the conference room. She was no longer the woman who had given her blood and heart so freely. She was stronger now, successful beyond what Lennox could have imagined, and married to a man who celebrated her achievements instead of being threatened by them. "Accept the contract," Matilda said finally. "And yes, inform them that the owner will be present." She smiled, thinking of the vision board in her office, no longer filled with borrowed dreams, but with achievements and goals she'd set for herself. "Are you sure?" Jennifer asked, concern evident in her voice. "Absolutely," Matilda replied. "After all, every great story needs a final chapter." The wedding invitation. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered among Elite Events' Daily Mail. The envelope was thick cream cardstock, adorned with gold leaf and an ornate wax seal, exactly the type of ostentatious display Matilda had come to expect from Atlanta's social elite. But this particular invitation made her hands pause as she sorted through her morning correspondence. "Lennox Alexander Jasper and Liliana Grace Foster request the honor of your presence at their wedding celebration." The irony wasn't lost on Matilda that Liliana had worked briefly for Elite Events 2 years ago, though they'd never met in person. Liliana had been part of their Chicago office, handling mid-level corporate events before suddenly resigning. Now, reviewing her old employee file, Matilda understood why. She'd moved to Atlanta after meeting Lennox at a business function. "Did you know about this?" Matilda asked Jennifer, who stood in her office doorway with an expression that mixed concern with barely concealed anticipation. "The contract request came through last week," Jennifer confirmed, closing the door behind her. "They want our top package, full service, all the bells and whistles. And—" she paused, pulling out her tablet. "There's a specific request from the groom that the owner of Elite Events be present at the wedding." Matilda leaned back in her leather chair, looking out over the Atlanta skyline. The Anderson and Mills building stood proudly among the steel and glass towers, a daily reminder of how far she'd come. "He doesn't know, does he?" she mused. "After all this time, he still hasn't figured out who owns Elite Events." "No one outside the company knows," Jennifer reminded her. "That's how you wanted it. Even our biggest clients have never met you face to face. Your identity has been the best-kept secret in Atlanta's social scene for 3 years. The invitation seemed to pulse with potential energy on Matilda's desk. She picked it up again, noting the details. The wedding would be held at the St. Regis, the same venue where she'd orchestrated the Johnson-Pierce wedding that had launched her company's success. The date was 6 weeks away, an unusually short timeline for an event of this scale. "Tell me about the bride," Matilda said, though she already knew the answer. She'd read Liliana's personnel file thoroughly the moment her resignation letter had arrived. "Liliana Foster, 28, former event coordinator at our Chicago office," Jennifer recited. "She worked for us for 8 months before relocating to Atlanta. Her performance reviews were excellent. She specialized in corporate events and showed particular talent in client relations." "And now she's marrying Lennox," Matilda said softly. "Does she know about me? About our history?" Jennifer shook her head. "Based on the timing, she joined Elite Events after what happened, and since you've kept your ownership private, she wouldn't have made the connection." Matilda stood and walked to the window, her reflection overlaying the city view. She'd changed in the past 3 years, not just the designer clothes and sophisticated haircut, but something deeper. Success had given her a confidence that no amount of Lennox's criticism could shake. "What's our current schedule for that weekend?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. She kept track of every major event Elite Events handled. We have the Thompson anniversary gala on Friday night, but Saturday, the day of their wedding, is clear. We had another inquiry for that date, but we hadn't confirmed yet. The decision crystallized in Matilda's mind. This wasn't about revenge. She'd moved past that need long ago. This was about closing a chapter, about standing in her truth before the man who had once tried to diminish her. "Accept the contract," she said, turning back to face Jennifer. "Full service, everything they want. And yes," she smiled, picking up the invitation one last time, "inform them that the owner of Elite Events will be present." Jennifer's eyes widened. "Are you sure?" "After everything he did." "I'm sure," Matilda replied. "But we're going to handle this my way. First, I want you to pull Liliana's old files, every event she worked on, every client interaction, every performance review. Then get me everything you can find about her relationship with Lennox, social media, society pages, mutual connections. You think there's something there?" "I think," Matilda said carefully, "that Lennox Jasper hasn't changed. Men like him don't. He's playing some kind of game, requesting the owner's presence. He wants an audience for something." She walked to her private conference room, where a large digital screen covered one wall. With a few taps on her tablet, she pulled up the preliminary wedding plans that had been submitted with the contract request. "Look at these details," she pointed out to Jennifer. "The venue, the guest list, the specific requests. It's all designed to impress, to show off. He's planning something and he wants the mysterious owner of Elite Events to witness it." "Should we decline the contract?" Jennifer asked. "No," Matilda smiled, a plan already forming in her mind. "We're going to give him exactly what he wants, the most spectacular wedding Atlanta has ever seen. And when he makes his move, whatever it is, we'll be ready." She turned to her assistant. "Contact James. Tell him I'll need him that weekend. And Jennifer, let's keep my identity under wraps until the perfect moment. After all—" She picked up the invitation one last time. "Every great revelation needs perfect timing." The wheels were set in motion. Elite Events would plan Lennox and Liliana's wedding with the same attention to detail and excellence they brought to every event. But beneath the surface, Matilda was preparing for every possibility. She'd learned the hard way with Lennox. Always be ready for the worst, while hoping for the best. The perfect setup. The 6 weeks leading up to Lennox and Liliana's wedding became an intricate dance of preparation and strategy. Matilda orchestrated every detail from her command center at Elite Events, watching through security feeds as her team transformed the St. Regis Ballroom into a fantasy of white roses and crystal chandeliers. Each decision was calculated, each element carefully chosen not just for beauty, but for strategic positioning. "The seating chart came in," Jennifer announced one morning, 3 weeks before the wedding. She laid out the elaborate diagram on Matilda's desk. "Lennox has requested the owner of Elite Events be seated at table 1, right next to the bridal party." Matilda studied the arrangement, noting how Lennox had positioned the various power players from Atlanta's social scene. "Interesting," she mused. "He's placed all the Anderson and Mills partners at prominent tables, but scattered them strategically throughout the room. He's planning some kind of announcement." The guest list read like a who's who of Atlanta society. Every major business figure, every social influencer, every person who could impact Lennox's career trajectory had been invited. But what caught Matilda's attention were the smaller details, the people who weren't invited, the subtle shifts in social hierarchy reflected in the seating arrangements. "Pull up Lennox's recent business records," she instructed her team during their daily briefing. "Something's not adding up. This wedding, it's too grand, too rushed. The budget alone is more than his annual salary, even with his recent promotion." Her investigators, originally hired to vet potential clients, returned with interesting findings. Lennox had indeed risen quickly at Anderson and Mills, but there were whispers of questionable deals, of clients who had mysteriously transferred their accounts. Nothing concrete, nothing provable, but enough smoke to suggest a fire. "And what about Liliana?" Matilda asked, spreading out the reports on her conference room table. "What have we learned about her time since leaving Elite Events?" The picture that emerged was concerning. Liliana had taken a position at a smaller firm after leaving Chicago, but her personnel file there showed a pattern of accessing sensitive client information, of being present at meetings where she had no clear role. When she met Lennox at a corporate function, she had already known an unusual amount about his business dealings. "They're using each other," Jennifer realized, looking through the documents. "She's providing inside information from her various positions, and he's using it to climb the corporate ladder." Matilda nodded, pieces falling into place. "And this wedding, it's not just a celebration, it's a power move. They're consolidating their position in Atlanta society, making their alliance official before anyone can discover what they've been doing." The security arrangements for the wedding became Matilda's personal focus. She hired additional personnel beyond the usual event security, positioning them strategically throughout the venue. Each guard was equipped with a small camera, feeding into a central monitoring system. If Lennox is planning something public, something designed to humiliate the mysterious owner of Elite Events, we'll be ready, she explained to James over dinner in their penthouse apartment. "But I can't help feeling there's more to it." James, who had built his tech empire by anticipating problems before they arose, understood perfectly. "You think he's planning to use this wedding to cover something bigger?" "Look at the timing," Matilda said, pulling up her tablet. "The wedding is on the last Saturday of the quarter. The following Monday is when Anderson and Mills announces their quarterly results and major account changes. This whole event, it's a smokescreen." She worked late into the night, reviewing every detail of the wedding plans. The flower arrangements were positioned to create clear sight lines throughout the ballroom. The lighting design, while beautiful, ensured there were no dark corners where conversations could happen unobserved. Even the music playlist was timed to allow for specific moments when announcements could be made. 3 days before the wedding, Matilda received an unexpected visitor. Sarah Chen, the doctor who had supervised Lennox's blood transfusion years ago, appeared in her office. "I hope I'm not overstepping," Dr. Chen said, fidgeting with her hospital ID badge. "But I saw the announcement in the society pages, and when I realized Elite Events was handling the wedding, I needed to warn you." "Warn me about what?" Matilda asked, though she already suspected. "Lennox has been back to the hospital several times recently, requesting his medical records from the accident. He's particularly interested in the blood transfusion documentation. He's been asking questions about liability, about the long-term implications of receiving blood from someone like you." Matilda's hands stilled on her keyboard. "He's planning to use that. After all this time." "I think," Dr. Chen said carefully, "he's planning to make some sort of public statement about how the transfusion affected him negatively. He's been consulting with lawyers who specialize in medical malpractice." The pieces clicked into place. Lennox wasn't just planning to humiliate her. He was planning to destroy her company. A public scandal involving medical malpractice, timed perfectly with his wedding, would devastate Elite Events' reputation among the very social circles they depended on. "Thank you, Dr. Chen," Matilda said, her mind already racing ahead to countermeasures. "Would you be willing to make a statement, if necessary?" "That's why I'm here," the doctor replied firmly. "What he's planning, it's not just unethical, it's legally questionable. I've brought copies of all the relevant records properly notarized. After Dr. Chen left, Matilda called an emergency meeting with her core team. The wedding was no longer just an event to be managed, it was a battlefield to be prepared. Contact our legal team, she instructed Jennifer. Have them ready to respond to any accusations. Then get me everything we have on Lennox and Liliana's financial dealings. If they want to play hardball, we'll be ready. She spent the next 2 days finalizing preparations. Extra security cameras were disguised within the flower arrangements. Key employees were briefed on potential scenarios. James arranged for several of his tech company's board members, influential figures in Atlanta's business community, to attend as guests. The night before the wedding, Matilda stood alone in the ballroom, surveying their work. The space was transformed into a winter wonderland, with thousands of white roses and crystal icicles catching the light. Every detail was perfect, every contingency planned for. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Jennifer asked, joining her in the empty room. Matilda touched one of the roses, its petals soft against her fingers. "You know what's ironic? Even knowing what he's planning, I've still given him the most beautiful wedding we've ever created. Because that's who I am. Someone who gives their best, even to those who don't deserve it." She turned to her friend and trusted employee. "But this time, I'm also ready to stand up for myself. Tomorrow, Lennox Jasper learns that the woman he thought he could dismiss has become someone he can't ignore." The final security briefing concluded at midnight. As Matilda drove home, the Atlanta skyline glittered with possibility. Tomorrow would bring either vindication or war, and she was prepared for both. The wedding day revelation. The morning of Lennox and Liliana's wedding dawned clear and crisp, a perfect October day in Atlanta. Matilda arrived at the Saint, Regis at 6 a.m., hours before any other guests would arrive. She wore a fitted emerald silk gown that complemented her dark skin perfectly, a power statement disguised as elegant simplicity. Her wedding ring, a unique black diamond set in platinum, caught the early morning light as she reviewed final preparations with her team. "All security feeds are active," her head of security reported, showing her the live feeds on a tablet. "We have cameras covering every angle of the ballroom, pre-function area, and adjacent corridors. Team Alpha is in position, dressed as service staff. Team Bravo will arrive with the general security detail in 2 hours. Jennifer appeared with the morning's intelligence briefing. Lennox arrived at 5 a.m. for early preparations. He's been making calls from the groom's suite, 3 to his lawyer, 1 to Anderson and Mills' PR firm. Liliana is due to arrive at 8 a.m. with her bridal party. Matilda nodded, scanning the reports. "And our special arrangements?" "All in place," Jennifer confirmed. Dr. Chen is seated at table 7 with full documentation in her possession. James will arrive with the 3rd wave of guests, bringing the board members as planned. Our legal team is on standby, and we have reporters from 3 major publications attending, all of them owing favors to Elite Events for past discretion with their own family events. The ballroom was a masterpiece of design, even by Elite Events standards. Thousands of white roses cascaded from ceiling to floor, interspersed with crystal chandeliers that threw rainbow prisms across the white marble floor. Ice sculptures caught and refracted light, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. Every detail was perfect, from the hand-calligraphed place cards to the vintage champagne breathing in crystal decanters. At 9 a.m., Matilda gathered her core team for final instructions. "Remember, no matter what happens today, we maintain absolute professionalism. Elite Events' reputation for excellence doesn't waver, even if its owner is under attack." The first sign of trouble came at 10:30 a.m., when one of her security team reported unusual activity in the groom's suite. "Lennox has assembled a group of Anderson and Mills partners," the agent reported via earpiece. "They're reviewing documents and seem to be rehearsing some kind of presentation." Matilda watched through the security feed as Lennox gestured animatedly, his face flushed with anticipated triumph. She could read his lips well enough to catch phrases like medical liability and company reputation. The pieces of his plan were falling into place. "Let them proceed," she instructed her team, "but activate Protocol Omega. I want every conversation in that room recorded and transcribed." The guests began arriving at 11 a.m. for the noon ceremony. Matilda watched from her private monitoring room as Atlanta's elite filed in, air-kissing and exchanging social pleasantries. The Anderson and Mills partners were easy to spot, moving through the crowd with practiced charm, dropping hints about a major announcement to come. At 11:45, Jennifer rushed in with urgent news. "Liliana's just had a heated phone conversation in the bridal suite. Something about sticking to the plan and making sure he doesn't suspect anything. Should we intervene?" Matilda smiled, a predator's smile. "Number let their plans unfold. Sometimes the best defense is letting your opponents think they're winning." The ceremony itself was flawless, a testament to elite events' precision. Liliana floated down the aisle in a custom designer gown, her practiced smile never wavering. Lennox stood at the altar, every inch the successful businessman in his tailored tuxedo. Only someone who knew him as well as Matilda could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands as he recited his vows. As the celebration moved into the reception phase, Matilda positioned herself strategically. She had chosen her moment carefully, the time when Lennox, flush with champagne and victory, would be most likely to execute his plan. The first dance ended. The toasts began. And then, right on schedule, Lennox clinked his crystal champagne flute, calling for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying across the hushed ballroom, "today is not just about celebrating love. It's about truth, about justice, and about exposing those who would deceive Atlanta's finest families." He turned, scanning the crowd until his eyes locked onto Matilda. The moment of recognition, when it came, was everything she had anticipated. His face froze, then contorted with a mixture of shock and rage. "You!" he breathed into the microphone. "All this time. Elite events. It was you." Matilda rose gracefully from her seat, emerald silk catching the light. "Good afternoon, Lennox. Congratulations on your wedding. I do hope you're pleased with our services." Justice served. The silence in the St. Regis ballroom crystallized into something tangible as Matilda stood, commanding the attention of every guest. James, her husband, moved smoothly to her side, his quiet strength a counterpoint to the chaos about to unfold. "Ladies and gentlemen." Lennox recovered quickly, his society smile plastered back in place. "Allow me to introduce our event planner, though she's failed to mention her personal history with me, a history that includes a questionable medical procedure that has affected my health and career." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Matilda noticed Dr. Chen sitting straighter in her chair, medical documents ready. But before they were needed, another voice cut through the tension. "Actually, Lennox," Liliana spoke up, her wedding dress rustling as she stood, "I believe it's time for a different kind of truth." She turned to face the crowd, her practiced smile now razor-sharp. "I've been gathering evidence of financial irregularities at Anderson and Mills, specifically involving Mr. Jasper's handling of client accounts." The color drained from Lennox's face. This wasn't part of his script. "Liliana, what are you doing?" "My job," she replied coolly. "As an undercover investigator for the SEC, we've been tracking suspicious patterns in client account management for months. Your invitation to the owner of Elite Events, that was your mistake. You couldn't resist the chance to humiliate your ex-girlfriend one more time, could you?" The ballroom erupted in shocked whispers. Lennox's fellow partners began edging away from him, corporate instinct for self-preservation kicking in. "Of course," Liliana continued. I had no idea the owner of Elite Events was Matilda until today. That's a rather delicious coincidence. Your attempt to discredit her with false medical claims would have only added witness intimidation to your charges. James stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. As a member of the SEC's Technical Advisory Board, I can confirm that Ms. Foster's investigation has been thorough and professional. Mr. Jasper, I suggest you step away from the microphone and wait for your lawyer. Lennox lunged for the microphone, desperation breaking through his polished veneer. She gave me defective blood. My medical records are right here, Doctor. Chen stood, holding up a thick folder. Including your signed consent forms, recovery documentation, and recent lab work showing no complications. Any claims of medical malpractice would be flagrantly false, and as your treating physician, I'm prepared to testify to that effect. Security guards, Matilda's hand-picked team, moved smoothly to surround Lennox. He looked wildly around the room, seeking allies but found only turned backs and averted eyes. Jennifer appeared at Matilda's elbow with a tablet. The SEC team is in position outside. Should I have security escort Mr. Jasper to them? Or would you prefer to let him leave with some dignity? Matilda considered the man before her, the man who had taken her love, her blood, her sacrifices, and tried to turn them into weapons against her. She saw now what she couldn't see years ago, his weakness, his fundamental hollowness. Mr. Jasper, she addressed him formally, her voice carrying across the silent ballroom. 3 years ago, you told me I didn't belong in your world. You were right, but not for the reasons you thought. I don't belong in a world of fraud and deception. My company, Elite Events, is built on excellence, integrity, and genuine service to our clients, values you might want to consider during your upcoming legal proceedings. Lennox's shoulders slumped in defeat. The security team moved in closer, ready to act on Matilda's signal. You know what the real irony is, Matilda continued, addressing not just Lennox, but the entire room. I gave you my blood freely, out of love. You tried to twist that into something shameful. But that gift, that act of pure generosity you scorned, became the foundation of my success. Because I learned that true strength isn't in what you take from others, but in what you're willing to give. She turned to Liliana, who had removed her wedding ring and was holding it out to Lennox. Agent Foster, I believe your operation is concluded. Would you like us to coordinate with the SEC team outside? The sweet aftermath. The evening air was crisp as guests filed out of the St. Regis, their excited whispers carrying tales that would become Atlanta legend. Lennox had been quietly escorted to waiting SEC agents, his facade of power finally crumbling under the weight of his own deceptions. The Anderson and Mills partners huddled in corners, making frantic calls to their lawyers, while society photographers captured what would become infamous images of his downfall. Liliana, now revealed as Agent Foster, had efficiently coordinated with her SEC team, ensuring all evidence was properly documented. She paused before leaving to speak with Matilda. I owe you an apology, she said. When I started this investigation, I had no idea about your history with him. Working at Elite Events was just my cover story, but seeing the company you've built, the lives you've touched, it's truly remarkable. Matilda watched as her team began the efficient process of dismantling the wedding decorations. Each crystal, each flower would be donated to local hospitals and nursing homes, a long-standing Elite Events tradition. Sometimes our greatest triumphs come from our deepest wounds, she replied. The ballroom slowly emptied, but the night wasn't over. Jennifer approached with news that would change everything again. The story's already breaking, she reported, showing Matilda her tablet. But not the story Lennox wanted to tell. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution is running with Elite Events owner helps uncover major financial fraud. Your identity may be public now, but it's being revealed on your terms." James wrapped an arm around his wife's shoulders. "Are you ready for what comes next? Being in the public eye?" Matilda smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought her here. "I've been ready since the day I decided not to let his cruelty define me. Everything I've built, elite events, our success, our reputation, it's all been about creating something meaningful, not just proving him wrong." Dr. Chen, who had stayed to help coordinate the evidence handover, approached with an unexpected suggestion. "You know, Matilda, your story about the blood donation, it could do a lot of good. Our hospital's donation center has been struggling to meet demand, especially for rare blood types." And so, a new chapter began. In the weeks that followed, Elite Events launched the Life Blood Initiative, a program encouraging blood donation by covering donors' medical bills, just as Matilda had once done for Lennox. The story spread, inspiring others to turn their own painful experiences into sources of hope. The media attention brought a flood of new clients to Elite Events. But Matilda maintained her company's selective standards. "We're not just planning parties," she would tell her team. "We're creating moments that celebrate the best in people." 1 year later, Matilda stood at a podium, accepting an award for Business Leader of the Year. The ballroom was filled with Atlanta's elite, many of whom had been present at Lennox's ill-fated wedding. But now they looked at her with respect, even admiration. "Success isn't about proving your worth to those who doubted you," she told the audience. "It's about proving your worth to yourself, and then using that strength to lift others. Every drop of blood we give, every act of kindness we share, ripples out into the world in ways we can't imagine." She touched the small heart-shaped pendant she always wore, a gift from James, on their first anniversary. In the end, love isn't about what we can take or demand from others. It's about what we're willing to give, freely and without expectation. Sometimes the very things meant to break us become the foundation of our greatest achievements. The legacy foundation they established became known for transforming lives, offering support to those rebuilding after betrayal and loss. Each success story added to a growing tapestry of hope, proving that the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building something so beautiful that they can only watch in wonder. And sometimes on quiet evenings in her office, overlooking the Atlanta skyline, Matilda would touch the small scar on her arm from the blood donation. It no longer reminded her of loss, but of the strength she found in giving. Her story became a testament to the power of rising above bitterness, of choosing creation over destruction, of transforming pain into purpose. After all, true power isn't in the ability to hurt others, but in the choice to help them, even when they don't deserve it. For in the end, we are measured not by the wounds we receive, but by the healing we bring to the world. I'll analyze the story to provide insights about recognizing betrayal and potential cheating based on behavioral patterns. 1. Early warning signs from the story. Sudden changes in behavior, like Lennox becoming cold and distant. Increased focus on image and social status over genuine connection. Making excuses to meet certain people or attend specific events, showing shame or embarrassment about their partner in front of others, deliberately keeping partner away from certain social or professional circles, resistance to including partner in future plans. 2. Red flags of potential betrayal, devaluing past sacrifices and shared experiences, speaking negatively about partner to colleagues, friends, sudden obsession with appearance or status, unexplained financial activities or secretive behavior, changed communication patterns, like taking calls in private, making new friends or connections they don't want to introduce, rewriting the history of the relationship. 3. How to protect yourself, maintain your independence and identity, like 3. Matilda, focusing on her career, Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Keep evidence of major shared decisions and agreements. Build your own support network. Don't ignore red flags for the sake of the relationship. Watch for patterns rather than isolated incidents. Pay attention to actions rather than words. 4. Healthy relationship indicators. Mutual respect and appreciation. Open communication about future plans, pride in partner's achievements, willingness to introduce partner to all aspects of life, shared values and goals, equal effort in maintaining the relationship, transparency about finances and social connections. 5. Recovery from betrayal. Focus on self-improvement rather than revenge. Channel pain into productive endeavors. Build a strong support system. Don't let betrayal define your future relationships. Use the experience to become stronger and wiser. Learn from the experience, but don't become bitter. Trust your ability to succeed independently. 6. Building trust in new relationships. Take time to really know someone. Observe how they treat others, not just you. Notice how they handle difficulties and challenges. Pay attention to consistency between words and actions. Watch how they talk about their past relationships. Notice their reaction when you achieve success. Remember, true love empowers and elevates both partners. It doesn't diminish or shame either person. If someone makes you feel less worthy or tries to hide your relationship, that's a significant red flag. The key message from the story is that your response to betrayal defines you more than the betrayal itself. Choose growth over bitterness, success over revenge, and remember that the best way to overcome betrayal is to build something beautiful from its ruins. Subscribe to Elite Events newsletter for more inspiring stories of triumph and transformation, where every celebration becomes a chapter in someone's journey toward their best self.